This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, a weekly reality check on sensible investing and financial decision-making from two Canadians. We're hosted by me, Benjamin Felix, and Cameron Passmore, portfolio managers at PWL Capital.
Welcome to episode 292. And Ben, if I say the words Bridgewater Associates and Ray Dalio, I would guess that many listeners are aware of the firm and the man. This week we welcome Rob Copeland, who's the author of the recently released book, The Fund, Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, and the Unraveling of a Wall Street Legend. And yes, that's a catchy title, and this is a very catchy book. You and I both ripped through it. It reads like a thriller. It is so interesting, even if you're not in the financial services industry, but if you are or even mildly interested in this business, it's a fascinating read. Rob is a finance reporter for the New York Times and was previously the longtime hedge fund reporter at the Wall Street Journal. So this book is an incredible story about Dalio, who is a billionaire founder of Bridgewater Associates, which is, I believe, the largest or one of the largest hedge funds on the planet, clocking in at around 100 billion USD of assets, down significantly, and Rob talks about that. So we thought this would be an interesting story. We loved the books. We invited Rob on. What did you think?
Well, I've been aware of Dalio, of course, as many people have for a long time. But I've always had some hesitation with his wisdom. Like he comes out with these YouTube videos about how the economic machine works and about how the world order is changing. And he had his book, Principles, of course, which was wildly successful and a lot of people read. But there's always been a question in the back of my mind about to what extent we should really be listening to Ray Dalio. Now, there's this difficulty here because who am I to question Ray Dalio, this wildly successful hedge fund manager? And I think that's part of his perception, is that he is this, and he is. You can't argue with that. He has been wildly successful. And he positions himself as having this deeper understanding of history and economics than most people do, which has allowed him to be as successful as he's been. So I always had this kind of doubt in the back of my mind, like, to what extent should we really be listening to Dalio? And then I read Neil Ferguson's book, Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, whatever. The book is relatively unrelated, but it has this one section that addresses Dalio's economic model. Dalio has this theory, I guess, or he calls it a model of how the economic machine works. And so I won't read Neil Ferguson's whole passage on this because it is reasonably long. But the punchline is Neil says that the difficulty with Dalio's approach is that it cannot explain the non-events that the model, had it existed in the past, would have wrongly predicted. Neil's just basically just saying that it's not a good perspective on history. The model's overfit to the history that we actually had happen, but it doesn't necessarily make it a good predictive model of the future because the world is too complex and too uncertain. Actually, here's another just from Neil's book. The reality, as we shall see, is that history is a process too complex to be modeled, even in the informal ways favored by Dalio. Moreover, the more systematic modeling is done of historical phenomena, notably pandemics, but also climate change or environmental degradation, the easier it becomes to go from being roughly right towards being precisely wrong. Anyway, so that cast further doubt in my mind about how much weight we should put on Dalio's, how believable, and you'll learn about believability during this episode, how believable Dalio should be. Now this is always, it's always an interesting thing to think about because Dalio has been so successful, and a lot of successful people believe that Dalio has this knowledge and wisdom because he's been so successful. And this has come up like in the Rational Reminder community, for example. There have been discussions about things Dalio has said. And anyway, so when Rob came out with his book, I was super excited Because usually, and as Rob talks about during the episode, usually the insight you get about Dalio comes from Dalio, like in his book, Principles. So to get the other side of the story, or a different perspective on the whole Bridgewater story and the success of the firm and of Dalio, I was excited to have that. And anyway, that's what we get in this conversation.
And as Rob says, much of the success at Bridgewater came before Dalio was Dalio.
Before he was the Dalio that we know now.
The character we all know now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Rob really, he nails it at the end when you asked him about what he hopes people will take away from the book. And he just basically talks about attributing wisdom to success. People can be successful, but that doesn't mean that we need to hear what they think about how we should live our lives.
Yep, exactly. Okay.
I don't know. I'm I don't know what I'd call it, conscious of the fact that this is an episode about a person. Like, we talk a lot about Ray Dalio and basically his credibility. And I'm not a big fan of talking about people. Usually this is a podcast about ideas, which I think is generally more valuable. But because there are so many people who view Dalio as credible based on his success, I think that this is a worthwhile perspective for us to share on the podcast. So hopefully listeners agree. But I am conscious of the fact that this is basically a whole episode where we talk about it more than just Ray, but we talk a lot about Ray. And that's a different type of topic relative to our usual. But I do think it's worth listening to.
Perfect setup. With that, Ben, let's go to our conversation with, from the New York Times, author Rob Copeland. Rob Copeland, welcome to the Rational Reminder podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Great to see you, and congratulations on your book. Ben and I both loved it. Fantastic read.
It's just great to hear.
So off the top, how much of the Bridgewater organization is dedicated to investment management?
So this is sort of the big, most fun question of the book for me, which is that Bridgewater Associates is world famous as the world's largest hedge fund. And they're known as a macro trader, so they try to predict global economic trends. But as a reporter, and I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal and now for the New York Times, when I was reporting on Bridgewater, very few people ever told me anything about the investing. There was just this complete obsession with the culture and what Ray Dalio calls the principles. So for the past, better part of a decade, I've really been looking into this idea of the principles and of the culture of the firm. And it's really nothing like the stories that Ray Dalio tells.
Do you have a sense of of the employees at Bridgewater, what proportion of them are actually doing investment management?
So at peak, Bridgewater had about 2,000 full-time employees, and God only knows how many consultants. And not only did they have only a few hundred people working on investing, but they only had about 10 who actually were allowed to see the quote-unquote secret sauce. So it's virtually no one working on investing. And sort of to skip to the end of the story, it might not shock you that they haven't been very good at investing for about 15 years now.
Do you have a sense of, in the investment management function, what are they actually doing? Like, are they doing quant stuff? You mentioned macro. Like, do you know how systematized it is?
So this is a big question. When Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater, talks about it, he talks endlessly about this systematized set of rules. He says that he, starting in the 1980s, began to write down his discoveries on economic history, and he backtested them. And then he says something very, very suspicious. He says that these rules are, quote, timeless and universal, and that they work till today. And you know, and I know, that people all over the world who are trading are working every day to find just the smallest new edge in the markets. The idea that there's these rules he made up in the 80s that are timeless and universal that work today it's risible. And so what I discovered in the end was that there's a group at Bridgewater that's literally called the Circle of Trust. And it's just about 10 people. And they're the only people who are allowed to express an investment idea, to put on a trade. And it's really not very quantitative at all. It really boils down to if they think something's going to happen, they get to call that a rule. So I don't think of it as quantitative or systematic at all.
And what about Dalio's model of economic cycles? Does that affect their investment approach?
Well, look, Dalio has become quite famous with these YouTube videos about how what he calls the economic machine. He thinks that everything can be modeled, that everything can be systematized. And there's a fair amount of agreement and disagreement about that. But what I found in the end is that that's all just window dressing. The most important rule at Bridgewater is what Ray Dalio wants, Ray Dalio gets. That a great theme of the book for me is that for all the talk of rules and principles, and Ray is this great emotionless mind, really Ray just gets to make it up as he goes along. And when you're king of the castle, you make the rules. So for me, the fun of the book is just watching everyone else sort of bend over backwards to justify why Ray is always right.
Can you talk about what people with actual expertise in economic history think about Dalio's model of economic cycles? I think you tell a story in the book of Neil Ferguson being at Bridgewater and having a pretty interesting interaction with Ray,
to say the least.
This was a great nugget for me to crack. So I had heard for years, there's this Harvard historian, Neil Ferguson. He is a bit of he's a famous figure in the sense that he gets on TV a lot. But he's a controversial guy, and he likes to make bold announcements, and so is Ray Dalio. So Ray invites him to Bridgewater to sort of do a debate, and Neil prepares, and Neil watches all of Ray's videos, which again say that essentially we can plot everything about the economy and that everything comes in cycles. And Neil has a very different view. His view is that actually humans are endlessly complicated, and that you can't plot, for instance, what president or prime minister is going to be elected. You can't plot the impact of technology. You can't plot climate change, or you can plot things like worker productivity or the rate of the birth rate, but that there are sort of endless variables here, and you can't actually fully quantify it. And rather than debate him, Ray just sort of loses it, and he starts screaming at Neil in front of the whole firm. He starts screaming at him, and he says, "Where's your model?" He has a profanity there, but this is a Canadian podcast, folks. And then afterwards, of course, Ray asks the whole firm. He says, "Who do you think was right, me or Neil?" And it will shock no one that everyone voted for Ray.
The story is crazy. So Ray invites Neil to debate him about his model. Neil debates him briefly, and then Ray loses it on him. And then Ray asks everyone in the audience who are Bridgewater employees who has won the debate.
Correct. And this is sort of the paradigm of the Ray Dalio debate, right? Is to set it up, to rig it, and then to make sure that everyone else proves that he was right all along. By the way, that anecdote there, which was not easy for me to get, but I did talk to a number of people. Neil didn't even know they had held that vote till afterwards. They hold that vote after Neil leaves the room. He's already in the car back to Boston, and then he hears from his former students who were in the room that there had been this vote. And needless to say, he hasn't been invited back.
It's just wild. How successful has Dalio been at predicting market crashes?
Well, as someone in the book says, Ray has predicted 10 of the last 0 recessions. So this is, I think, one of the more important lessons that I've learned about Ray, which is that since the mid-1970s, when he starts his career, he has really been a doomsday prophet the whole time. And that's just factual. I did what I hope no one else does. I went back and I actually read all of the interviews he'd ever done. I had my research assistant pull up the TV clips and everything. And it seems like just about every year he has a reason why the world is going to collapse. And of course, we now know with the benefit of hindsight that there have been a few recessions, but the world, spoiler alert, knock on wood, has not collapsed. So he's not very good at actually predicting recessions. But what he's excellent at is getting attention. And so when you're the kind of guy who's going to have a Chicken Little routine and go around literally every year and say the sky is falling, that actually helps you a lot get clients. No client, no asset manager is going to make a lot of money saying, "Hey guys, everything's sort of okay. You can just buy some ETFs. You'll probably do pretty well. You won't even have to pay me a fee." Ray has constantly, for decades, over and over again, said, "Calamity is coming. You need my help. Give me your money." And it's been spectacularly successful. So I would say he's been pretty terrible at actually predicting recessions, but he's been uh, incredible at profiting off of ones that never come.
Hmm. As people who tell our podcast listeners that they can just buy ETFs and probably don't have to pay us a fee, at least in a lot of cases, I can tell you that it is a terrible business.
Well, what I love about asset management is asset management was a wonderful business to build wealth for the asset manager. The as an experiment for the end investor, if you just look at the numbers, if most people on average can do a lot of this on their own with some research or with the help of a financial advisor who they might pay, a relatively modest fee. But you usually don't need the most complicated, quote unquote, smartest guys in the room.
Yeah. You mentioned the last 15 years of investment results not being super compelling. What role throughout the history of the firm have investment results played in its success? Because one thing about Bridgewater is that we can't argue with the fact that it is massive.
Well, it's crazy, isn't it? So
It is.
Ray tells this story, and the story is that he has started Bridgewater in the late 1970s out of his two-bedroom Manhattan apartment. He's told this story thousands of times. And he grows it to be the world's largest hedge fund with $170 billion under management at peak. So that's an incredible success, and we should give him credit for that. Now, he leaves out a few parts of that story, but what I think is really important is that through about 2005, Bridgewater has incredible success, investment success. The performance is superlative. It really was early to this idea of a rules-based investment approach of saying, "Hey, I'm not just going to wake up one morning and say I read the newspaper and I think that the dollar is going to appreciate." He really did study economic history, and he was tremendous at it. The problem and the real sadness and the fun of Bridgewater is that around 2005, he starts to make up these things called the principles. And remember, he's already a billionaire by that point. Bridgewater at that point is one of the world's 5 biggest hedge funds, but he starts to search for this greater meaning. And so what my book is really more about is about this guy who's close to on top of the world, and that isn't enough. And he starts to sort of lose it. And as he becomes more and more obsessed with these so-called principles, uh, he takes his eye off the ball in investing, and literally to this day, just earlier this month, it was reported that Bridgewater's funds had collapsed again at the end of last year. It's a little sad, to be honest.
So you raised it there. So what are Dalio's principles?
Okay, so Ray's famous for these principles, and they start with just about 10 of them. And they're essentially that we should conquer our own emotions. We should be able to speak hard truths to one another. And it's really important to remember that this makes some sense. If right now, Cameron, if you cut me off and you said, "Rob, you're rambling a little bit, you could do a better job at XYZ," maybe it would be better if I could, take that and not feel stung, not have my feelings hurt. And then that probably is better than you saying, "Hey, Rob, you're doing such a great job. You have a great haircut. Hey, if you wouldn't just consider just maybe rambling a little less, but otherwise you're doing fantastic." So that's Ray's first principle is essentially let's cut through all the bull and just be honest with one another. The problem is that he starts to come up with then dozens of principles and then hundreds of principles, and it turns into a rule book with everything from rating one another on in real time about our personality and our conversations, and it just goes totally off the rails. But the principles at the start, there are a fairly vanilla self-help idea of if you can conquer your own emotions, you can make better decisions. And as Ray says, you can literally live a more meaningful life with more meaningful relationships.
Hmm. So how did Dalio develop the principles?
Poorly is my short answer there. He develops them at the start by just writing down what's working and what's not. And it's sort of a running Microsoft Word document. And again, it's not crazy, and it's just inside Bridgewater. So at the beginning, everyone's just, basically saying, okay, this is the boss. These are his new rules. It's no big deal. It's no different than you go into an office and your supervisor says meetings are now going to be 30 minutes at max. Maybe you think that that's good or bad, but okay, he's the boss, right? The problem is that Ray keeps expanding them. And even more than that, he starts to talk about them publicly. And it begins to make him famous. People really like the idea of this billionaire, multi-billionaire, who has these lessons to teach. And he starts to, do a ton of media and expand them and expand them and expand them. And then it becomes his whole personality. And the problem is that the principles start to overtake everything else that's going on at the firm.
Wow.
And it's really quite fun. It's darkly funny in its own way. It's comic, and honestly, if it weren't all true, you'd think I was making it all up.
Wow.
How are the principles perceived within Bridgewater? Like, does everyone take it as gospel within the firm?
Remember that when you're hired at Bridgewater, they're going to tell you about the principles right from the start. So unless you're one of those original employees, of which there's obviously very few because the firm's been around a long time, they tell you at the start, we have these principles and it's going to be a transition period. So they're attracting people who want to sort of give up their own value system and adopt Bridgewater's value system. So already it's a self-selecting group of people who sort of want to enter this personality experiment. And there's another really great factor here, which is they're paying you a ton. They were for so long the world's largest hedge fund. So you might be willing to put up with things that you wouldn't otherwise be willing to put up with because it's your boss. It's the money. It works in concert with one another. And remember, over and over and over again, Ray can always remind you, these are my principles, and I say that this is how I became so rich. So who are you to say that you disagree with them? And that's been a powerful argument for decades now.
Amazing. How big a role do you think these principles played in Bridgewater's success?
None. Sorry, I keep giving you one-word answers. If this were Bridgewater, you would now be cutting me off and saying, Rob, could you restate the question in your answer? The great irony of this all is that Bridgewater's best years came before Ray ever made up the term principles. And it's a basically straight plot line from post 2008, 2009, when he really starts giving media interviews about it, begins writing his book, which is called, of course, spoiler alert, Principles. And the performance of Bridgewater just starting to take a dive. It's really a lesson, I think, for all of us, which is you really can't retrofit reasons for everything. It goes back to what Niall Ferguson would have said. Not everything is a machine. For all of Bridgewater's great success, its best years happened when nobody was really paying attention.
Can you talk about how believability works within Bridgewater?
Sure. So this is one of the core inventions and really figments of Bridgewater. Ray and many other people, probably even the three of us, would probably agree that not everyone's opinion is equal. However, what Ray does is he invents a principle for that, in which it literally says not everyone's opinion is equal and don't treat them equally. And he begins to develop a rating system so that we can determine, for instance, which of us is more, in his words, believable at various tasks. For instance, I might be considered believable at writing a book about Ray Dalio. You might be considered believable at investing or hosting a podcast or men's fitness. Who knows? Whatever you're good at. So Ray begins to ask everyone to rate one another on a scale of 1 to 10 all day, every day, in any number of categories, so that those of us who receive higher ratings then have quote unquote higher believability, and we will be judged, more reliable in certain categories. This is classic Bridgewater because everything I've just described to you sounds okay, right? It does make sense. Maybe the fittest one of us should be considered more believable at men's fitness. But what Ray never talks about is that he actually rigs the system from the very beginning. And he rigs it so that Ray Dalio's vote is going to count the most. He's going
Right.
to be the most believable person at Bridgewater. And once you realize that, the whole meritocracy of it all, it's a farce.
That part is so crazy. So it's like this idea of a meritocracy, and I agree. Conceptually, it sounds really cool, but that part of the book is just like is mind blowing. How did you uncover that fact?
Well, it's taken a number of years, to be honest. I've been writing about Bridgewater for close to a decade now. The great thing about Bridgewater is that there's another aspect to its culture that we haven't talked about yet, and it's called radical transparency. And it's part of the principles. And Ray says that everything should be adjudicated in the open, and that means that for many, many years, everything at Bridgewater was taped, every conversation, large and small. And that meant that everyone could go back and replay the tapes and quote unquote learn from one another. So I was able to talk to a number of people who had gone back and sort of tried to investigate for themselves internally what had happened inside this system. Over time, now the taping system begins to get warped. Ray begins to create case studies. He begins to change history. He begins so that you pull up a tape and you would now only be able to see an edited version of something. And once you realize that that's happening, you're off to the races. And then you realize that of course it was rigged from the beginning. And I did talk to a number of people involved in the technology who confirmed that for me. And by the way, Bridgewater doesn't deny it.
Wow, that's incredible. So just to make listeners understand it, so I think the way Dalio describes it is that believability cascades. So it's like believability cascades from people who are more believable to less. But Dalio had believability rigged so that all believability cascaded from him. Like he was always the most believable no matter what. Is that roughly right?
Yeah, that's correct. And what I would say also is we're not spoiling anything here. In the book, I did this very intentionally. I actually spoil that for you in the introduction to the book. I want you to know from the very beginning that it's rigged. And I don't tell you again that it is. Then I can tell you the whole story of Bridgewater, and you have to remember that it's rigged, or when you see things working in a certain way, you can
Right.
almost forget. Um, and that was an intentional choice because at Bridgewater, although I'm telling you it's rigged, and although it's true that it's rigged, he doesn't ever fully admit it. So you have to see the whole ecosystem and realize that that's really what's going on in the background.
Wow. What does the dot collector app at Bridgewater do?
The dot collector is really an amalgam of a lot of what we've spoken about. So at Bridgewater, they have their own language. They call it they have a lexicon, and the dots are ratings. So right now, if we were at Bridgewater, we would be rating each other in this conversation. So we might be saying, for instance, Ben should get a 6 in listening because he's been pretty good. But maybe I can only get a 4 at say touching the nerve is another Bridgewater category. So essentially leaning into discomfort, and we would be rating each other at every moment. So we'd be inputting them into an iPad app called the Dot Collector, and those ratings would be not averaged, by the way, but they would be weighted average based on our believability, and then everyone could see sort of how we were rated. This all feeds into something called a baseball card. It's just like a baseball player has their stats.
Yep.
A Bridgewater employee has their statistics. Now, I can already hear listeners in the car pulling over and screaming out the window and saying, "This just sounds so complicated. This sounds like such a mess," right? or what's the Canadian equivalent? They're going out and they're screaming at a moose. Is that like a bad stereotype there? Uh, the but the thing is, this all happens slowly over time, over years at Bridgewater. So first we're rating one another for a little bit, and then we have a dot collector, and then we have our baseball cards out. And then all of a sudden we've got 100 different ratings categories. And then, by the way, Cameron, we could be down dotting you for not giving me enough negative feedback. Maybe you're too nice a guy. And that literally starts to happen. So then you have to start investigating me to find the worst aspects of my personality. Otherwise, I'll down dot you for not being willing
Wow.
to do what is right.
Can you imagine? And all in real time.
All in real time, all in real life, and all with real people. I think that's a really important factor here, is that these are real people with real lives. And to hear Ray talk about it, he says literally it's a joy for all of us. But I can tell you it's really just a joy for Ray Dalio.
Hmm. Have other because they developed this into a full blown app. Have other organizations started using it?
This is Ray's great white hope. You know, he spoke for years, spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this technology, and he's desperately tried to get other companies to use it. But though a few companies tried, they did little trial test runs of it. I can tell you that none of them have adopted it at scale, and even Bridgewater has dumped out a lot of it at the end now. You really couldn't script it. It's like it's operatic in a way, but it doesn't work. It's never worked. But I'll tell you what it does work at. It gets them a lot of attention. It gets millions of people watch his TED Talks and such. So in the end, does it even matter that it doesn't work? Because he gets to keep talking about it like he does.
Interesting. So, Rob, you've talked to many employees, both current and former. How would you describe the experience of working at Bridgewater?
Well, there's really two versions of this. Like so much of Bridgewater, it's a yin and a yang. So there's the Bridgewater that people think that they're joining. And it's largely new college graduates. It's largely, 22, 23-year-olds with not a lot of sense of what a regular workplace would be. Or they tend to hire very experienced employees who don't have a lot of other options, sort of who flunked out of a number of places in their career. So you've got these two groups of people who are unlikely to want to leave. They have to be there. So they join and they know it's going to be difficult. And they put up with it for a certain amount of time. And they rate one another and they criticize one another and they cry. And they're the ambulance, excuse me, say it a different way. And ambulances are called to Bridgewater's office, take people away who are, having seizures, who can't handle this culture. But Ray just keeps telling you over and over again, this is the secret to my success, and you need to literally push through to the other side so that you can have a meaningful life with meaningful relationships. So a lot of people leave. Some people stay. They get paid a ton of money. In the end, virtually no one stays and is a true believer, except for Ray in the end. But, people are willing to put up with a lot for a fat paycheck.
So you've, not for this book specifically, because he wouldn't talk to you as I understand it, but you've spoken to Dalio prior to writing this book, right?
Oh, absolutely. Many times.
What, if anything, stands out to you about interacting with Dalio relative to maybe other hedge fund managers that you've spent time speaking with?
So Ray is quite charming. He really does have two sides to his personality. And I've spoken to him several times as a newspaper reporter, writing articles about Bridgewater. And he's almost always willing to get on the phone and explain himself to you. And that can be quite intoxicating, to be honest. To have someone that successful, he's worth at peak, $20 billion. To have someone who's willing to get on the phone and listen to you and explain himself to you. And so I could myself be someone who would be attracted to Bridgewater. The The longer you spend talking to him, though, you realize that it's not really a two-way conversation. He is so used to being able to dictate the terms, to literally, rig the whole thing to make himself the most believable, that he has a version of reality that he wants to tell you about, and he cannot engage with the other side, with the experience of what it's like for everyone else. And in a way, I really can't blame him. I mean, why would you want to? It's a whole lot more fun to, live in your own world. And so whenever I've spoken to him, it's been perfectly pleasant, but every single time he's been disappointed in what I've written. And that's because it's my job to talk to everyone, to to have everyone's perspective in my work. And Ray's really only interested in his own.
Hmm.
So further to that, what actions has Dalio taken to create his public-facing image?
Well, we should start at the end there, which is he's been staggeringly successful at everything he's done.
Yeah.
He first of all hires this huge PR team to put him out there and to talk about the principles constantly. He's still doing it to this day. And he sits for magazine articles. He appears on 60 Minutes. He goes, he becomes friends with Charlie Rose, and he actually starts to talk to Charlie Rose about starting his own TV show. He films not just one but two TED Talks in which he talks about the concept of believability and the dot collector, as we spoke about. The What he does is he creates this show of this benevolent billionaire who has achieved everything he wants in the world, and now all he wants to do is pass his lessons on. And there's a huge audience for that. He even gets booked on Gwyneth Paltrow's podcast, and Gwyneth Paltrow suggests that he should run for president. And he didn't run for president, but you can see how this just turns him into this mega celebrity.
Hmm.
Now, I actually once went to a conference where he was speaking, and honestly, I at this point I've done so much work on Bridgewater. At this point, I could write his remarks for him. But what I was shocked about was that there were hundreds of people waiting in line afterwards just to speak to him, just to get a picture with him, to get him to sign their book. It was like a sports figure. It was crazy, and that's a real experience. People are desperate for a hero.
But that point really stuck out to me in reading the book, is that he's really put forth an effort to create this image that people now have of him. Like, that wasn't an accident. It wasn't accidental that he became somewhat of a household name.
Oh, definitely not. And what really amuses me about Ray, and what I love so much about his story, uh, and is quite relatable, is that he loves to say that he doesn't like attention. He doesn't like wealth. He just happens to be so wealthy. It didn't. He says, "Yuck, why flash diamonds?" in one interview. Then he buys the most expensive home in Connecticut. He has a yacht with not one but two submarines. I don't know what you need the second one for. I guess they can come rescue you if you're down in the first. But this is I am a business reporter for the New York Times, and I can tell you that this is a through line to my coverage, is that hyper successful people love to say that they just happen to become wealthy, and you too could, and actually the wealth doesn't make them happy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I would tend to agree with that. Actually, I think most of us, I mean, everyone knows someone who's got more money than them, right? And I don't think that necessarily makes that other person more happy. But Ray's entire public image is based on the fact that he's all about the principles, not about the money. But it's just not true at all. There's something he leaves out of this story, which is that Ray Dalio marries into the Vanderbilt Whitney family. He marries a hyper wealthy woman, and she's, by all accounts, by the way, a lovely person. But he never, ever once gives credit for the fact that he didn't just start this firm out of his apartment and grow it organically. He started out of his apartment, and then he married into one of the wealthiest families and moved into a full New York City brownstone, which is where he built Bridgewater from. Um, so, people are endlessly complicated. It goes back to what Niall Ferguson, I guess, would say. And no one is more complicated, I would say, than Ray Dalio himself.
On that topic of Dalio's success, can you talk more about, because I think there were a couple of stories, in addition to the one you just mentioned with his wife, about aspects to his success story that he previously left out that you uncovered through your work for this book?
There's one that honestly it is like spine tingling to me when I found out. So Ray loves to talk about how he is the son of a jazz musician. His mom was a homemaker. She passed away when he was a teenager, and that's all true. He did not grow up wealthy. And what he says is that he first learned about the stock market as a caddy, as a caddying for golf players on Long Island. And I never really questioned this story. Kind of almost sounds like the all-American thing, like you could write it in a screenplay. Oh, I was on the golf course and I got stock tips, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't for years till I learned that that wasn't the whole story. That, in fact, he ingratiated himself to one very wealthy New York family in particular when he was a teenager. And he was their caddy. But I could not find a single interview that he ever gave about them. And he really becomes their surrogate son. And I interviewed, their only surviving grandkid who knew Ray very, very well. And Ray would come to their Christmases and he went on vacations with them. And they helped him get his first job in finance. And he went with them when he was trying to raise money to start Bridgewater. And I always thought it was just so fascinating that he leaves them totally out of the story because, there's nothing wrong with having gotten a little help. There's no suggestion that he didn't do anything untoward. He became friends with them. He was friends with multi generations of them. But what he doesn't want to do is just admit that it wasn't just the principles. It wasn't just Ray, that he had a lot of help. And I think that that is quite telling about his personality and about sort of who we are really as people. That a lot of people they just can't quite admit that they were lucky or that someone else helped them a lot. He wants this to be a fully rags to riches story, and it's just not that simple.
So just to put a fine point on that, how does he explain his success?
He says that he studied economic history and that he figured out these rules for how the economy works, and that he slowly built this firm with little by little money and attracted clients and built it into organically the world's largest hedge fund. Um, that is part of the story, but it's not all.
Hmm. Have you heard from Dalio since publishing the book?
I've heard a lot from lawyers for Ray Dalio and for Bridgewater. The Look, he's been aware of this book since I signed the contract to write it. He was actually the first person I told after I signed the contract. And I told him I had an open mind, that I wanted to hear his perspective and anyone else that he wanted me to speak to. And he argued with me a little bit, and then he hired 3 sets of lawyers to threaten me, to threaten my publisher. They sent hundreds of pages of letters. They tried to pressure my employer. They tried to get me fired. This is the paradigm of radical transparency, guys. And this is what he did for years behind the scenes. So I haven't heard from them directly, though they've certainly complained enough about the book. I think what if I were speaking to him honestly, I would hope that he would read the book and actually see the the real arc of it, the real tragedy of it, which is that there's a ton of fun in this book. There's great success. He really did build the world's largest hedge fund, but then he just got way over his skis, and he needed to be seen as more of a guru type figure. And well, not to spoil the end, but I think you can tell from this interview, I don't necessarily think of him as much of a guru.
Hmm.
What's the response from readers been like?
Oh, it's been incredible. It's been honestly such a wild ride. When you write a book, it's such a solo pursuit. And I wrote a lot of this during the pandemic, and it took hundreds of interviews, to piece these stories together. And when I released the book, I thought, well, the worst thing that could happen would just be that no one would notice. Where they would say, well, there's another book about for the business section, you know. Um, And what was wonderful was that Ray was so twitchy about the whole book is that he started attacking it before he'd ever read it. So there were, there were people who were excited about reading it. I've heard from so many people inside Bridgewater, outside Bridgewater, people have spouses, children, who just honestly, they've thanked me for making them realize that they weren't crazy, that this really was what was happening. This was a rigged system, and that they can show this book, frankly, to their friends and family to explain what happened to them. But more than that, what I love about the response is that so many people have reached out to me and just said, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was entertaining, and that you learn from Ray Dalio's story how so many finance figures portray themselves. Nobody anymore wants to say, "Hey, I can read the stock tape," or I wake up and I just read a lot of research reports and then I'm smarter than everyone else. Everyone wants this greater story, this greater philosophy, and I think Ray's been more successful than anyone at selling that story.
So, I mean, the book, other than being an incredible story, it doesn't paint a super positive picture of either Dalio or Bridgewater. But as we've mentioned a few times, we're still talking about this massive hedge fund that even with sort of middling returns for the last little while, it's still huge. What do you think explains the success of Bridgewater as a business?
How many hours do you have for that question? Yeah, so I'll tell you a story about someone reached out to me after the book came out, which is one of their investors actually reached out to me, and he said to me, "I'm reading your book, I'm loving it, but can you explain to me a little more about their investing?" And I said, well, why the heck are you asking me? You're one of their investors. You have hundreds of millions of dollars with them. Why don't you just ask them? And he said, "Oh, well, Bridgewater is the world's biggest hedge fund. They're just sort of like the default. We trust them. I'm just like curious about learning a little more." And that really taught me a lot.
Wow.
Their own investors are just saying like, "Okay, I want to put a little money into hedge funds. I'll put it into Bridgewater. It seems safe." We should say that Bridgewater has shrunk a ton. It's about 170 billion at peak. It's now under 100 billion. That's
Really?
still an incredible business, by the way,
Mm.
but it is much, much smaller. And one of Ray's goals was to have a $1 trillion firm. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But look, there are so many people who want to put their money with the most famous investor. They just want to be able to say, "Hey, I went and I visited Bridgewater. I talked an hour about the markets with Ray Dalio." And as
Yep.
someone who's done that myself, I can tell you it's really appealing. So it's not that fun to sit in front of your computer and open your Fidelity page and buy a few Vanguard ETFs. It's not like it's a lot more fun to invest in Bridgewater and get to rub shoulders with quote unquote the greatest minds.
I think that's very accurate. And just being Bridgewater makes Bridgewater able to continue to gather assets.
And where does the money come from, by the way? Increasingly, it's not from wealthy individuals or pension funds or even Western uh, institutions. It increasingly comes from the Middle East, from China, from sovereign wealth funds, and all of these places are very susceptible to the celebrity factor of Ray Dalio. He was just in Davos this month, talking endlessly about his the latest thing that will ruin the world. Can you even guess what it is this time?
Is it debt?
It's been debt for a while, so yes, but it's climate change now. It was Civil War 2 years ago. It was World War III last year. I honestly believe that he's going to start predicting World War IV and just skip the third one. He just can't stop. So I mean, he's going to probably will do this podcast again in 6 months, and he'll have said that a tsunami is going to ruin us all. So but again, it works. It works. It really does.
Yeah. What about succession at Bridgewater? Like Ray's not a young guy, and it's this big fund. How does Bridgewater carry on post Ray, if that's even a thing?
this is the big theme of the book, in fact, which is that Ray, for about 2 decades, claims that he's just about ready to retire, and he's just looking for the right person to hand the keys over to. And it will shock no one who's listening that, of course, Ray doesn't think that he can be replaced by just one person because he's too special, but that a group of people can take over. So a lot of the fun of the book is all of these people trying and failing to sort of take the ring from Ray and earn his approval, and he always lets you get just a little bit close enough, and then he sort of snatches it from you, pushes you down to the bottom of the mountain again. Now, Ray technically retired about a year and a half ago, and when that happened, I finished a draft of the book, and I thought to myself, oh shoot, like this book is going to fall apart because now he's retired, and now it's like it's too neat. Now he's gone. Who cares? And let me just tell you, he retired, and basically immediately I started hearing stories from people at Bridgewater that he was back. It's like, oh no, Ray never left. Ray took a 1 week vacation essentially, and then showed up again and started weighing in. And so he's technically retired. I have reported in the New York Times his retirement package. Remember, this guy hates money. He says he gets paid $1 billion a year as essentially a royalty for allowing this next generation of Bridgewater leaders to take over. And he's still there in the background. He's still weighing in on everything. He's still the public face of the firm. I don't believe he'll ever really go away because he can't. It's such a huge part of his personality. And what does it say about Ray if someone else could replace him? Then maybe he really wasn't so special all along.
Interesting. So other than being a fun read, what do you hope people take away from the book?
Well, I honestly hope that people can see the patterns here, that we can see how we've elevated our business leaders in recent years and recent decades, even. I like to go back and just remember that, we've always had sort of captains of industry. John Rockefeller named a university after himself. So ego is nothing new. But what's new here is this idea that there's a higher purpose involved in the attainment of all of this wealth. And we see this with Elon. We saw this with Steve Jobs, even. We, of course, saw this with, all these tech figures like Elizabeth Holmes, Adam Newman of WeWork.
Yeah.
They're always selling us something. They're selling us this improvement to our personalities. And I really think there should be a little more skepticism of just because you're rich doesn't mean you have anything to offer me. You're just rich. It's just money, guys. It doesn't make you more interesting or more worthy. I can tell you that in my career, I have a really interesting job. I get to talk to successful people, and I'm conscious that they're speaking to me because I'm a reporter for the Times. But I get to talk to them, and oftentimes I'll have an hour dinner, an hour and a half, have a lovely time, and I forget about it immediately. Just because you're a billionaire doesn't mean you have anything particularly prescient to say. And so this whole self-help mantra of all these guys, it just I wish we could just say, hey, congratulations, you're super successful. Hopefully you're charitable at some point, and then go away. Go marry your third wife and buy an island, and that sounds fantastic.
Well, the book is incredible. It's called The Fund, Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, and the Unraveling of a Wall Street Legend. Great to have you on, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Rob.